Good evening, everybody. We're back with another episode of Film the Police LA. And tonight we're going to talk about, you're going to be surprised, but believe it or not, we're talking about Karen Bass once again. So she is creating more news because we come to find out, as the LA Times is reporting and others, that has deleted her text messages when she was in Ghana during the fire, when the fires first started, and during her transit back. In fact, she has been deleting her text messages, which she conducted official business on for the last 2 years throughout her mayorship. And I think that it's quite outrageous because, first off, it's illegal. Secondly, why would you want to delete your text messages? What are you hiding? And so tonight we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about that with my good friend, somebody who is a journalist, but also has been heavily involved in the CPRA process that the journalists in this incident had to go through to try to get public documents, those text messages from Karen Bass, but additionally to talk about how frustrating it can be as a journalist or as an activist to get documents from the LACD government overall. So tonight, I have my good friend, Sean, who is here to talk about this. This guy is an expert on this stuff. If we were not live right now, I'd probably be outside walking around looking for police stops. I'd probably be talking to him, and we'd probably be talking about the CPRA process as it is. So let me add him to the stage here. We have my friend, Sean Beckner Carmichael.
How you doing, everyone? Sean? You know what? I am doing okay. Like you said, the CPRA process is something that's somewhat unique to California. But ultimately, really, at the end of the day, it is very similar to the federal mandate, which is called FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. CPRA allows for a few additional points of access. And it also makes many of those requests and records free for anyone to get. So generally speaking, with FOIA, they can charge you for the pages or for the information gathering itself. Whereas with CPRA, if they already have those records, they are by law meant to send those to you within 2 weeks. And I'm sure we'll get to whether or not you actually ever get those within 2 weeks at some point during the conversation. But yeah, it's, it seems on its face as though it's a very nerdy process, but often you can get really enlightening things on how our government works. In your case, oftentimes I'm sure getting a sense of, rooting out what it is that you're looking for. In my sense, oftentimes it's just sunshine, and transparency. And, every once in a while, a nice little spicy record here and there.
Well, what's important is you can't have accountability. You can't have any sunshine on the process unless the government not only curates and keeps these documents, but also provides them when requested through, in our cases, often the CPRA process. And so we come to find out that while Karen Bass was overseas in Ghana and while she was in transit back from Ghana, that she was in communication, a lot of it through text messages. And we come to find out that she has deleted those text messages, which, it's problematic to say the least. Seems certainly illegal because from my understanding of LA law, they have to keep these documents for 2 years, yet she deleted them. And I think it's a little frustrating. Tell me your thoughts on that.
So I don't know if I can comment exactly on whether or not it's legal or not, but I will say that under California public records laws, records of doing business, so to speak, are considered public records and should be made available to the public. So as far as whether or not she intentionally deleted them, I can't say. For my purposes, it doesn't really matter because, a mayor's text messages while on the job, ostensibly, I'm not trying to get her. I don't think anyone's trying to get her records of what she had for dinner that day or anything like that. But while she's on the clock, ostensibly, we have a right to know what the communications look like. Again, I can't comment on the specific legality of it. That's a little bit above my pay grade, but I will say that other text messages have become available when requested. It's not uncommon to request text messages from a city employee's phone that is owned by the city. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago that the same reporter that reported on the fact that Karen Bass is not saving her text messages also was able to successfully CPRA another city employee's text messages to Karen Bass. So it seems as though there's less sunlight specifically on the mayor's records on her text messages. I would think personally, it's not my job as a journalist often to state opinions, but I do think it's reasonable to state that the executive branch of city government should, if anything, have more transparency, not less, than the rest of the city employees and county employees.
Oh, it's funny because I believe LA City law has more stringent requirements when it comes to preserving documents than even state laws. So you know what I want to do? I want to pull up the actual article here, the LA Times article, where they talk about these deleted text messages. Let me find it here. Let me pull that up. Here we go. And let's just go over this article together, right? So the headline is, "Why is Mayor Karen Bass deleting her text messages?" by Julia Wick and Matt Hamilton from the LA Times. And it said, when flames erupted in Pacific Palisades on January 7th, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass was more than 7,000 miles away on a diplomatic mission to Africa. Bass headed home shortly thereafter and was in transit for nearly 24 hours as the fires ravaged the Palisades and surrounding communities. Keep in mind, from the time that these fires started until the time she got back here was 24 hours. She and her office have said she was in constant communication during that period, but it's impossible to know exactly what she was communicating because her messages were not saved, according to a city lawyer. He said, quote, "Her phone was not set to save text messages," which is interesting language. Her phone was not set to save text messages, said the lawyer, David Michelson. Michelson said there was no requirement that the city official or employees save text messages, despite the fact that the city's own document retention policies dictate that most records should be kept for at least 2 years. Under state law, any writing related to the conduct of government is deemed a public record. On January 10th, which is 3 days after the fire started, the Times filed a public records request for all text messages sent or received by the mayor while she was in transit on January 7th or January 8th that mentioned fire response in her travel plans. Bass has come under heavy criticism for being out of the country when the fire erupted amid historically dry winter and forecast of hurricane winds. Nearly 2 months later, so they finally got this request filled just recently on Thursday, Bass's office said it had no responsive records without stating whether it was withholding any records or any reasons for not producing records. On Friday, responding to questions from the Times, Michelson said that Bass's phone auto-deletes text messages and has done that for the last 2 years. Let's stop there for a second, Sean. Let's talk about that, right?
You know, what's funny is the first thing that I did when I read this article was I didn't know. Ostensibly, I think Karen Bass is using an iPhone. I feel like I've seen her use an iPhone at some point, interviewing her or something like that. So the first thing I thought of was I didn't know iPhones could do that. Could auto delete text messages.
Yeah,
it turns out there is in fact a setting. I haven't had a chance to really look at it, but there's a setting where it can essentially delete text messages after a certain amount of time. Again, I'm not going to say she was intentionally deleting specific text messages, but a policy of auto deleting text messages, again, is to say quite frankly, is not transparency. It is not in the spirit of the CPRA. I believe there was a case in, I think it was San Jose, messages from an employee's phone that is owned by the city or any municipal government, is a record that you can request. It's a part of doing business of the city. And therefore, we, as people that live in the city, as people who pay taxes, or as people who just live in the city, have a right to get those records. Particularly, this is her time in between Ghana and arriving in Los Angeles is probably the most controversial 20-ish hours of her status as mayor, of her being mayor. And there's already facts that are in contention, right? We already saw the LAFD fire chief let go over ostensibly. The argument is many people are alleging that she refused to do an after-action report. She's alleging that she did actually want to do an after-action report, but didn't think that the LAFD had the resources at the time, so wanted to focus more on cooperating with an after-action report that the city council
they haven't even
had
actually funded the after-action report, so you can't
Right.
have an actual. It's interesting, but that's a whole different story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's particularly there's also in contention some facts about, was Mayor Bass told that we were heading for really scary conditions?
She was
with the fire. Yeah, we know that now, but how much was she told, right? And how aware was she? We don't
Her
know.
office was aware.
Mm-hmm.
It was up to her office to then inform her personally. But that's a whole different story. One thing I will say about Sean, if you're ever out there in the field, you can see him there. He's drinking a green Red Bull. I've been in many police scenes with him late at night where he's probably drank 3 or 4 of them. So seeing that is not unusual at all.
We're trying to cut down these days. We're getting older, and we're a little worried that we might get like diabetes or something. So we are doing a lot less Red Bull these days, trying to cut down on smoking too. But trying to do that and not completely go insane. So it's slow going.
When you're out there and see some of the stuff that we've seen where bodies are laying in the street, sometimes it's kind of hard to get away from those things, but it is what it is. Now, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you develop vices. I've done a lot of what's called stringing and a lot of police shootings and things like that, and those pretty regularly are extremely stressful. You see pretty rough stuff, and that's when a smoke and a Red Bull sounds really nice.
Yeah, and we handle these scenes a little differently. I think you're usually pretty calm and documenting things, and sometimes I'm running my mouth a little bit at the cops. Sometimes.
Different jobs.
So let's come back to this, right? Because let me pull it up again. Sorry. When I look at this, first off, there's a legal argument about whether the text could have been deleted legally or not. But then there's also the question of, but why are you deleting them? Why is it important for you? And it says here in an article that she's been auto-deleting them for over the last 2 years. Well, she's been in office for just over 2 years. So essentially every text message that she has sent during the course of her mayorship has been deleted. And like you said, I didn't know that there was an actual function where you can auto-delete it, right?
Yeah, that was news to me. I found that out earlier today.
Right. So it means that she went out of her way to make sure that these texts are deleted throughout her mayorship. And that's problematic because...
I won't say she went out of her way, but I will say this.
From a functional standpoint of actually...
Well, I was going to say, to your point, it was a conscious decision. I will say that. It was a conscious decision to set the phone up to auto-delete text messages. I would never run for mayor for a lot of reasons. But, I would like to think that at minimum, we have somebody in charge who respects, even where they're not codes specifically for Los Angeles, which make preserving records far more important and far more stringent. I would think that a mayor would follow, at minimum, the spirit of the law. And that, I think, it's not my job as a journalist to say opinions very often. I think it's pretty safe to say that deleting text messages, especially during a time where your main primary mode of communication with city officials, with other city officials who are ostensibly your employees, it's nonsense. It's you have to preserve these things. If for no other reason than, frankly, for your own reference. I don't know about you, but I text my friends and then or text coworkers, text people that I work alongside all the time with information, and then I go, oh yeah, that's right. 3 weeks ago, what was that thing?
Well, I also think, listen, I think that when you have a situation where that these things, under the spirit of law, that you should be keeping all these documents, all these text messages, all these emails, but then you like I said, you actually go through the steps it takes to auto delete. It's not that you just deleted them, but to auto delete them and auto delete all of them. None of that is, again, there's a legal aspect, but then there's the aspect of just good governance. Why would you do that? Why would you decide to make that decision? Let me pull this back up again, because let's get into the legal aspect, or the argument that they make. All right. It says, Los Angeles Administrative Code section, blah, 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 dictates that most records, quote, shall be retained for a minimum of 2 years unless a shorter period is otherwise permitted by law, or a longer period is otherwise required by law, or unless, consistent with state law, a different period of retention is established by order or resolution of the council. Michelson argued that the section does not apply to text messages. So this section doesn't apply to text messages at all. It applies to all the records, but not to text messages, relying on a state attorney general's opinion from 1981, long before text messages became a commonplace means of communication. Quote, as articulated in an attorney general opinion, a record that must be retained is made for the purpose of providing future reference, Michelson wrote in an email. Texts are ephemeral types of electronic communication, to use Supreme Court words, that afford fleeting, this is crazy to me, fleeting thoughts and random bits of information that provide an ease and immediacy. Texts are not intended to provide future reference for the author or recipient, let alone public official record. What do you think about that, Sean? Because what I'm hearing here, it's like, when you're talking about fleeting thoughts, it's one thing if you're just sending an emoji, right?
Right. This is going to sound silly, but the spirit of good governance, the spirit of transparency, you said, well, it's not an emoji. Frankly, if it is an emoji, I still think that there's a level of what emojis is the mayor sending to her employees? Listen, if she's sending like eggplant emojis to someone, I think we need to know that.
Right. but to compare it to that,
right? So here's the thing. I think that obviously, I don't want to speak to the legal argument. I'm not a lawyer, and frankly, I'm only just now kind of brushing up on all of these things. That being said, I think at the end of the day, the spirit of the law and the spirit of transparency dictates that, frankly, even if they are fleeting thoughts, they are important. They are crucial to us understanding the way that the mayor communicates with either her constituents or with other city employees. We pay taxes. We are the bosses of every city employee, right? Furthermore, I think that particularly in this case, right, where we're talking about a period of about a day where the mayor was not in Los Angeles while there were fires raging, in the Palisades area. There was also the Eaton fire. There was a fire in the Hollywood Hills. You know, there was a lot of fire, and frankly, you know, a lot of panic. You know, I was getting pretty frequent text messages from friends that, you know, they were freaking out, and quite rightfully. You know, I think to describe the mayor's primary line of communication during probably some of the worst moments of the disaster as fleeting thoughts is probably not a great argument. You know, these are
especially, and let me say, especially because her office says that she was in constant communication with officials, and they were saying that they stayed in contact through various means, including text messages. And when she got to Dulles Airport, to the time she got back to LA, her only ways that she was able to communicate was either through email or text. So we're talking about a primary source of communication, and any information that she is getting or receiving is, I think, to claim that these are fleeting thoughts is sort of irresponsible. I think at least let the public decide.
Right. We'll let the public decide, I think is a great way to look at it. Right. And look, you know, I can't say this enough. Even if they are fleeting, silly thoughts, that phone is likely city property. So even if it's a fleeting thought, Lord knows, I have CPRA'd plenty of fleeting thoughts throughout the years. Not usually intentionally, but, you know, emails can be fleeting thoughts. They're still important to see because it's about understanding the way that city government does business at the end of the day.
I think that's important to bring up email, because what's the difference? If you can delete text messages, then why can't you delete emails then?
Well, it seems like the city attorney, again, I am not a lawyer, but it seems like the city attorney is arguing that they are somehow different. I don't personally see a difference. They are both electronic communication. They're both ultimately records that have been retrieved via a CPRA request in the past. So it should be retrievable. I can't speak to the legal aspect of it. There are smarter people than me looking at that. But I will say this. I have received text messages in the past via CPRA. I probably will from other offices in the future. And it's concerning that particularly the executive branch of the city government, which ostensibly is in charge of everything, seems to think that there are rules that no one else seems to be abiding by. Or, well, there's a lack of rules that everyone else seems to be concerned about following. At the end of the day, that's a concern in and of itself.
I think it's also important to look at it this way too, right? Look at yourself, the business that you conduct on a daily basis, professionally. How much of it is done through text messages? And think of everybody who's watching at home. Think of how much business you do through text messages.
Well, I'm a reporter, so for me, it's probably about, I would say about 50% of my business is done specifically via text message, about 30%, well, 20% call, and then the rest is probably signal. It's, you know, electronic messages. If I were a city employee doing what I do, and Lord knows I couldn't do what I do if I were a city employee. But text messages are often a way to do your work. Like you said, I mean, I would ask everyone here, how often are you texting your boss during your day, you know, or your other employees, or, you know, your colleagues? Probably quite a bit. We don't think about it, but, you know, in an average day, I'm sure I send out probably 100 text messages that are at least somewhat work related. Granted, I have a kind of unique job, but I would imagine that the mayor of all people probably is sending out a significant amount of text messages.
Especially
that's fair to say.
Especially during a wildfire when she's overseas and she's in transit, and that's the only way she can communicate with all the different officials in government. And I'm not talking about just the fire chief and
Mm-hmm.
all their responses, but we're also talking about a lot of communication with other politicians, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
on the county side, state side, federally. There's a lot of
Yeah.
information in
Well,
there.
what I was going to say is, I mean, at minimum, right? Perhaps this is me being overly optimistic about city government. Perhaps it's me being pessimistic. I don't know, but I would imagine that at minimum, as mayor, you'd be having a conversation within that 24-hour period with, at minimum, city council president, city council, whoever's the people that are representing the districts that are affected by the fires.
Yes.
So that's at least two, counting the Hollywood fire, at the time. That's someone from FEMA, probably, right? That's probably someone from the Red Cross. That's probably the president or vice president, someone in the federal government.
The emergency council, the emergency management board,
Certainly
the county
Newsom,
commissioner, county supervisor,
county supervisors, because that's at least
the governor.
at minimum. Yeah, the governor we already mentioned. So that's like 10 people at least, at minimum there, right? And it's a shame, and I think it's really telling that Lindsay Horvath was asked for her text messages during that period, and it seems as though she produced them fairly quickly. The text messages between her and Bass. So more to come, I guess. I did want to take a second. Julia Wick does absolutely outstanding work in city council. I don't think that she gets nearly enough credit for the workload she does, for how often she is the one to break news about the city council. And I believe Matt Hamilton worked on the story as well. Yeah.
Actually, so
am I correct on that? I want to make sure I'm giving the right person credit.
That is correct. Okay. And I think Zanizer may have contributed to a little bit, because I think it says in the article.
Does it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, so okay, so like he said, he claims that these texts are just fleeting thoughts or whatnot. And it's the LA Times, Julia Wick, who wrote this article, writes that the Supreme Court decision cited by Michelson, however, held that San Jose public officials' text messages on personal phones were public records that had to be disclosed if they related to government business. The State Public Records Act has no specific provisions for document retention. And it says here, First Amendment Coalition Legal Director David Lloyd disagreed with Michelson's interpretation and argued that text should be retained. Yes, text, quote, yes, text can be considered ephemeral, just like emails, Lloyd said. But as I read the plain language of LA's own our own administrative code, the city imposed upon itself a more stringent record retention requirement than state law otherwise requires. Right. Kelly Avila is an attorney and public records expert who has represented the Times in unrelated litigation, said the explanation offered by Bass's lawyer is flawed. A mayor does not get to determine what is or is not a public record based on device used. I think that's important, right? Because at the end of the day, we're just talking about the device that's being used. And adding that such logic would invite officials to delete emails and voicemails that they deem ephemeral.
So I also want to be clear. I know we're really hammering this home, so I don't want to spend maybe too much more time on it. But there's an important other aspect to this, right? You mentioned the device used.
Right.
Now, let's perhaps be cynical for a moment. I know it'll be hard for both of us to do that. But say I'm a politician, and maybe there's something that I want to communicate to another person that maybe I'd rather not be communicated to the rest of the world and be discoverable via CPRA, right? So you mentioned device use. If there is a rule that's or lack of rule or whatever that says that there is a specific device that I can use that is no longer discoverable, what is to stop me, if I'm perhaps a more cynical politician, from exclusively using that device going forward?
Exactly.
So again, it's about process. It's about the spirit. It's about making sure that things are transparent. And hey, really kudos to the LA Times. That article really made it clear and made it plain that it seems from their point of view, and I might get a little bit of flack for saying this. I'm pretty large fan of most of the reporting at the LA Times. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. But they mostly do great work, and they seem to be very clear about the fact that this is not in compliance with records laws. So.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be making the case that, or at least they're legal experts, that this is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, at the end of the day, there, like I said, there's a legal argument, and then there's also the good governance, the in the public interest argument, right? So here, it's like they're trying to make the case that we have the right to delete them, right? But then there's the case of, but why? But why are you deleting them?
Right.
Let me pull up this last part because I think this is super important. And it talks about her path or her schedule after the fires broke out. It says Bass left Accra, Ghana, about 9 p.m. on January 7th or 1 p.m. LA time as the fire grew, traveling the first leg on a military plane where she was able to make phone calls and communicate by text and email. Early the next morning, she boarded a commercial flight at Washington Dulles International Airport and would have been able to communicate only by email and text before arriving in LAX at 11:24 on January 8th, according to her itinerary. So again, we're talking about, it's not just the fact that she was using the device, but at the end of the day, it's the only way she was able to communicate was through text or email. And if it's done on this device, then she feels that I don't have to keep records of those at all. I want to know, did she email while she was using her phone? And were those emails retained? I also want to know, when she was in that sort of mode, was she in communication with the president of the United States? If she deleted those messages, I would have a hard time believing that those are just fleeting thoughts. Right. I think that's sort of important. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I would argue, maybe this is me being overly optimistic rather than my usual cynical self, but I would like to think that any communication with the president of the, ostensibly the most powerful country in the world, regardless of who's at the helm of it, I don't think that communication is fleeting. I think that it's pretty easy to make the case that there was a fire going on, right? I'll be frank. I missed the first few days of it, but I toured Altadena quite a bit. Spent a little bit of time, outside the Palisades. Went to some of the rescue centers and things like that. And I saw a lot of people who, frankly, had lost everything, and really went through, and many of them continuing to go through, probably one of the worst, if not the worst moment of their lives, right? We had nearly 24 people die in these fires between the Palisades and Eaton, which is primarily LA County. But we had, we're still figuring out the bill for this thing. And, on top of that, even if you weren't anywhere near the burn zone, your life was affected. The air quality was really low. It will certainly affect the economy. So I don't think that it's a great argument that a text message is fleeting. I don't I don't consider any text message I send to be a fleeting thought, even if it is, it's be it me trolling a friend or whatever. But it's, again, about good government. And it's about making sure that we have a good handle on what the response was. I think certainly the response is controversial. Regardless of, again, where you stand on the political spectrum, I think it's fair to say that there is a significant amount of cynicism regarding the city's response, the state's response, and the county's response.
Yeah.
I think to not have seen that coming is perhaps a bit silly. We'll see, man. You know, I think that ultimately I'm curious to see what other sort of horrors we find out about all of this.
Well, let's pull up one of the horrors we have found out, and that's with the communications with Lindsay Horvath. Before we get to that, just shout out, what are your social media addresses? Right now we're streaming on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. X,
okay, so I think let me double check here. Yeah, so my tag is just underneath my name right there. It's A Cat with News. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on Instagram. I don't do a whole lot of Twitter these days, but you could, I guess, follow me there. I don't really communicate.
That's where, to be honest with you, that's where most of the viewers come in for this podcast. All right, it's mostly Twitter. So
fair enough. Hi, Twitter people.
I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah. But yeah, A Cat with News on all platforms. If you want to see social media that I've divorced myself for even longer, on Facebook, I think I'm A Cat with News still. I don't know. Right. Always A Cat with News.
What have you been working on lately?
So I've been working on a piece. It should come out very soon about the response to Trump's deportation ramp up, specifically within Los Angeles, especially East Los Angeles and Boyle Heights, where we are starting to see a resurgence of a lot of the imagery and honestly, even a lot of the same people as the Chicano movement of the late 60s. So we're starting to see a resurgence in the Brown Berets, which were formed in the late 60s, actually in a cafe called La Piranha. We're starting to see a resurgence in, chants of Chicano power. We're starting to see resurgence of the idea of community self-defense. And we're also seeing, a concerted effort of folks who are driving throughout the city, whose goal is to find ICE agents who are mid-operation and attempt to, I think some would argue disrupt, some would argue inform people of their rights. And I think it's really an important thing. I think Los Angeles, particularly East Los Angeles and Boyle Heights, have a long history of revolt against anti-immigrant policies. And there's a lot of drawing on a previous time going on. So I'm doing that. I am also, you can often find my work in the Beverly Hills Courier. Most recent issue I wrote about a man who broke into a McLaren dealership and stole a car, drove through a plate glass window with the car, got himself all bloodied up, and then stole another car, left the McLaren dealership in that car, evaded LAPD, and ended up getting caught a day later during a suspicious person call.
I got to be honest with you. I think I remember that incident. It's probably about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago.
No, that was a few days ago.
Oh, that was a few days ago. Okay, there was a similar incident that happened once before.
Yeah. All right, so it's the 8th. So I think that happened on the 1st, I believe.
And where did this happen at?
This happened in Beverly Hills, right on Olympic. So my guess is, I don't know which way he drove, but my guess is because the McLaren dealership is very close to Pico Robertson area, which is part of the city of Los Angeles. So my guess is he probably got out. You only have to drive like a block and then you're out of Beverly Hills from there. So
How did he steal it? Did he get keys for it? I mean, how did this happen?
So I don't have all the details. He broke in and I'm guessing he just found the keys. Yeah. But that's kind of a crime blotter piece. I also, you can see a lot of my work in the Beverly Hills Courier on the Beverly Hills Unified School District, which is certainly going through what a few of the board members have called a crisis. It is a very long story. Just search my name on Beverly Hills Courier. You can get the up-to-date information. And I'm a freelance reporter, so you'll see me all over the place.
Okay. All right. So let me pull up the article about the text messages between Lindsay Horvath and Karen Bass. Okay. And it says the headline is "Doesn't feel very locked arms to me." Texts reveal strain between Bass and Horvath. Right. And again, this is by Julia Wick, the LA Times. In correspondence obtained, actually, let's get into the article. So Los Angeles was deep in crisis on January 21st when County Commissioner Lindsay Horvath made her frustration known to Mayor Karen Bass. The Palisades fire was only partially contained. Forecasters had issued a rare alert amid vicious winds, warning that new fires could spark. And the first rain of the season was expected soon, meaning mud and debris could careen down scorched hillsides. Bass was still struggling to regain her political footing after stumbling badly in the days after the fire broke out. City and county officials had been holding daily conferences together until that morning and the previous morning when Bass spoke to reporters without her county counterparts. Behind closed doors, those appearances and other issues involving cooperation and communication had become a topic of contention between two of the most powerful women in Los Angeles, as lengthy text messages that Horvath sent Bass at 9/11 that morning. Oh yeah, that morning reveals. Now, this is kind of fascinating stuff. She says here, "You asked us to lay off the daily pressers. We did. You asked us to join for this announcement tomorrow. We asked you to join for us for this announcement tomorrow. No response. Now we hear you're doing one without us today when we are in lead role in your department's request," wrote Horvath, whose district includes Pacific Palisades. "Doesn't feel very locked arms to me," she added, invoking a catchphrase Bass has used to emphasize the importance of cooperation among government officials. The slogan is central to Bass's political brand, with the mayor citing it at public appearances. Now, first off, there's a lot of shade going on there, right? And you notice a certain frustration, but I also think it's important to understand that Horvath released these text messages. These same text messages were requested by reporters, by Julia Wick, from Bass's office. And so Bass's argument, it seems, since all her text messages are deleting, that these are fleeting thoughts right here. These communications, what she's talking about. So obviously they're arguing about, how they're rolling out the communication efforts and stuff. Seems very important. These don't seem like fleeting thoughts. What are your thoughts on that, Sean?
Well, I think certainly that communication, we're talking about Lindsay Horvath, who is part of the Board of Supervisors, which is, each supervisor has a pretty large amount of constituents. I think ultimately we don't have quite the time to go through the nuances of city and county government, I'm sure. But to be clear, each city council member has a fair amount of autonomy. Each county supervisor has a fair amount of autonomy in what is the largest county in the United States. So these are powerful people. I'm a bit surprised that a county supervisor would be that concerned about the line of communication. And I think ultimately it goes to my point, which is it's pretty clear that the level of communication itself even is somewhat in contest here. So even if they are fleeting thoughts, that level of communication is something that we are, as me as a journalist, as a person who ostensibly lives in the city of Los Angeles, you live in the city of Los Angeles. These are things that I think are in the public trust. These are things that I think are important to know. And again, even if you don't think it's important to know, the law is the law. And it seems as though smarter people than me are willing to say that this is not, that deleting these text messages is not in accordance with the law. So we have these, look, to be clear, we have these laws for a reason, right? We have these laws because it's important for people to be able to understand the way that A, their tax dollars, B, the place that they live in, and C, frankly, not to get too sort of high-minded and philosophical about it, but there's a contract between people and the government, and if the government is not giving them the level of communication that they feel they deserve, how are we to knowledgeably accept whether or not this social contract exists, or should exist? I do feel like we should talk a bit about the CPRA process. I feel like it's for anyone that's watching. I promise you, it is so much more interesting than it sounds, and it is so much more important than it sounds. Anyone can put in a CPRA request. You don't have to be a reporter. You don't have to be a lawyer. Being a lawyer helps. Being a reporter helps. But if you're curious about records within your city government, or state government or county government, you can request them. And the reason is because it helps with transparency. It helps us understand the way our city government is working. It helps us understand sometimes why things are the way they are,
Let's walk through that process real quickly on filing CPRAs. Because there's different ways to do it, right? Essentially, all you have to do is request information from a government official, send them an email, and they have to fill that request, provided it meets a certain criteria. And there's another way, and let me pull this up. The way that, at least, not that.
Are you going to go to next request? You should.
I'm already there at next request. Right. And I think next request is important. I think, first off, this is a government portal that you can use to request public records from many offices in the LA city government. Right. So we have a list here.
It's wild to see that screen in a phone. I've looked at that screen. I would say I put in about 2 or 3 requests a week. It's wild to see it in a different context from my own laptop.
So what's important is, so you have different offices that you can request it from: city administrative officer, the city clerk, city controller's office. And then you get into some of the council districts, right? You can request it from Nithya Raman's district of CD4. And then you have Katie Yarvlosky in CD5. And that's it. So we're talking about, of all the different council members, only 2 can you request through next request. And people will say, well, you know what? It's not really that big of a deal. You could just send them an email. But the difference is after a file is made public or fulfilled, the request is fulfilled on next request, it then becomes a document in the portal where you can just go ahead and let me go back to this home screen. And you can look up, everybody will have access to it. So it's one thing if you go and send a request via email, they will send you the documents back. But that's, now you have access to the document and nobody else. But if it's fulfilled through next request, it's there in that database, and anybody can go in there and just search for go through all the different requests. I'm looking at this one right here. Somebody requested one recently about the Palisades fire. Requests were
may I make a suggestion if you're searching CPRA?
Yours?
No, what I was going to say is so there's a little button there under the
the
search,
little, yeah.
closed or open. So if you are just curious, you can search by keyword. If you
Yep.
do so, I would highly suggest searching under closed records.
Yes.
So closed records are going to be records that have been closed by the office that's been requested. So for instance, if I requested a list of every car that LAPD has bought in the last year, and their call sign number or something like that. I would probably go by, again, keyword and then click closed and then perhaps find it. If I'm looking for information on, say, Katie Yaroslavsky's communications manager, who I forget the name of right now. I might put her name in as a keyword search, put closed, and then you can look at it. The reason that I'm suggesting that is because there are some offices, particularly city council offices and police department, who have an insane amount of records, an insane amount of emails, an insane amount of communications that go out every single day. Frankly, I have found things in other people's CPRAs that I don't even think the person who made the request saw. Because it's not uncommon with LAPD in particular, when you do make a request, for there to be, 600, 700 pages worth of documents. I have no doubt that I have probably scrolled past a gigantic story, not even realizing it. So just a kind of suggestion there. But the larger point is, this is a good way to understand the government that you are a part of. It makes you a more informed citizen. It also, frankly, as a reporter, obviously, this is a significant portion of what I do for a living. But you don't have to be a reporter. You don't have to be an attorney to make these requests. And in fact, knowledge about your city government can only benefit you, right? Might make you mad from time to time, but it will benefit you. It will make you more knowledgeable. It will make you understand, the world you live in. So,
well, I also think it's sort of outrageous that we have this portal, but only 2 council members are using it. Again, it limits the access that you can have the public has to these documents. But you don't have to be a lawyer to actually make a request. I mean, you
not
can
at
just
all.
come in. You could just come in here under the request thing. Let me pull this up again.
And in fact, sometimes you can read the requests people make, and boy, can I tell you, some people are definitely not lawyers based on what they put in there, based on their language in the request. Can you pull up one of the Michael Ayele's requests?
Oh God. Actually, let's not. That's not. I don't think that's good for anybody's mental health.
So this is maybe inside baseball, but there's a man who the man must make 10 requests a day, and every single one of his requests is seems like a person who maybe might not have the best handle on reality. I think, putting it nicely. And it seems as though he spends a significant portion of his day making CPRAs. I will say, every once in a while, he will act. I don't know if it's on purpose or accidental. Every once in a while, he will get some pretty good information on city government. I have used his CPRA in reporting previously.
Yeah. How many CPRAs do you have open right now?
So I'm glad you asked. I haven't been able to count, but it's in the dozens at this point. Some agencies are extremely responsive. There are some agencies that I've never had an issue with throughout the county. I will say Beverly Hills Unified School District, I've been doing quite a bit of reporting on them lately. Almost every CPRA I've ever put in, they get back to me with the responsive records within days, sometimes hours. Whereas Los Angeles Police Department, I have outstanding requests from 2021 still open. And we should probably talk about sort of the loophole or sort of the way to delay a record. Now, do you want to talk about that, or should I?
Yeah, let me bring this up, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I have CPRAs that I requested back in 2021, and they're still saying we're searching. So what happens is they can delay using various different reasons. First off, you're going to get an automatic 21-day delay just outright because the process is extensive, and then from there they will use that every month for months on end. And there's something new that they've been using, Sean, and I don't know if anybody else has come up with this. This is a new one. Now they've completed the CPR request. They've done all the document collection, all that after 6 months. This is a case where I asked for one detective's emails for 3 days. I just want 3 days of his emails. 6 months later, and they said, okay, we're completed the process, but we have to now have a supervisor go through it and make sure it's releasable, which is something new, right? But not only that, I just got a month later, they sent another delay to me saying, yes, we still haven't had the supervisor look at it. And for me, that's your problem. That's not a me problem. That's a you problem. You have to handle it, and it's illegal. First off, it's illegal. It's not a legal reason to do it. So go through the other reasons that you have seen for delays.
Yeah. So we should probably go through the denials before the delays, because that's pretty simple. So there are many personnel records that are exempt from CPRA requests. William, you can probably speak to these better than I can, but for the most part, they are essentially, in the case of LAPD, unless an officer is accused of basically gross malfeasance, and there's a few different things there, the personnel file for the officer is exempt from a public records request. There's also, and this is something that I think ultimately, to some degree, it makes sense. However, I don't know if it's always being used properly, which is essentially a response that is basically too large for a department to handle. So, for instance, if let's be the most generous. If I were some guy and I were to request a public records, the public records, and that request was every single email, phone call, text message, and document that LAPD has ever produced going back to 1940, it would be unreasonable, I think, for them to put those all together in one little package just for me, right?
Right.
I think we can all agree that that would be unreasonable. It would cost the taxpayers.
The common language that the
what.
LAPD uses is that you need to narrow the scope of that request.
Yeah. So oftentimes, if you make a request that, perhaps is reasonable in the requester's opinion, that's not, every single record ever, you will get a response that says, please narrow the scope of your search. Occasionally, once I finally narrow it, I found, okay, fair enough. There was one time where I didn't realize that the 3 letters that I was searching for as a keyword within emails of certain officers was also the 3 letters of a nearby city college. So the amount of
the search.
So ultimately, what I didn't realize I was asking for was like 20,000 pages of emails or something like that. So
you're not
I had to, so I had to narrow it down a bit. So, in that case, it's reasonable. Oftentimes, however, it'll be, hey, can I get emails from this guy on this day from or to this address? And even then, you might get I don't know about that. It's
going to take at least 3 months. What should be completed within 25 days will take months.
Mm-hmm.
Automatic.
So the other issue that you will get is, frankly, I think it's reasonable to say, there are many, even within the Los Angeles Police Department, who will concede this, That the Los Angeles Police Department's Public Records Division is, frankly, significantly smaller than any other department within Los Angeles, or even departments nationwide. It's a very, very small
It
department.
used to be one person handling
Mhm.
CPRs. Now they're up to 4. No, that's not nearly enough.
It is small. I will say that. So it's not. Look, it may not entirely be them not wanting to release things. Sometimes it really is the fact that they are intensely backed up. And should they be backed up like that? I would argue probably not.
No.
But oftentimes what you will get, and this is why records lawyers can be useful, you'll get a response that will basically say, we're unable to complete the request at this time. It'll set a date. Oftentimes that date will be like 2 or 3 months in the future. And then the next month, they'll just bump up the date with essentially an identical email. And frankly, it is frustrating, to get email after email of, promises and not get them. But when you get them, man, does it feel good. I apologize. We're going to switch over audio just for a second here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Here we go. Sorry about that, friends.
Yeah, I mean, so listen, one thing you'll often get, and you mentioned earlier how when it comes to LAPD, they will often use site PC 832.7 of the penal code as the reason why you cannot have access to an officer's personnel file, but there are exemptions to that, and that's to SB 1421, which says that no, you actually have to provide any information related to deadly use of force, lying, dishonesty, financial crime, unlawful search, anything that's sexual harassment or sexual assault, bias policing or racial profiling. But those are the exemptions. But that's often abused when they talk about 832.7. They'll just deny you everything that should be public under that claim. Maybe I don't. Depending upon the inquiry. We dealt with that not so long ago. We were requesting the post ID numbers of the officers, and they refused to fulfill it. We sued, and they just settled last week. So we should be getting those documents. But again, that's an abuse of the system. That's what happens when you request these documents, and they'll often try to look for reasons. And I got to be honest with you. I think it's a lot easier to get requests filled to the LAPD because at least they do use Next Request. Sometimes if you request to the mayor, they just ignore the emails. You can't really ignore it when you're going through the portal.
Mm-hmm.
But the mayor was just straight up ignoring them. Have you dealt with any CPRAs directly with the mayor?
Not a huge amount. Most of my reporting tends to be kind of hyper local and focused mostly on public safety. I've never seen a delay from the mayor's office, but I would say I've put in less than 10 requests with the mayor's office, which is a bit of a blind spot on my part. And there's also, I think within the city, there are a lot of great reporters. We were just talking about Julia, who really focus on the mayor. So I've always kind of maybe let that be, perhaps to my detriment. So we'll shoot some out to the mayor maybe tomorrow.
Yeah. So generally speaking, in my opinion, since the mayor has taken office, I feel that the city departments have become more. I want to say more secretive, but less likely to work with the public or reporters, an extension of the public, in providing requests. I've talked to other reporters and they say, listen, LAPD no longer provides information and it's nearly impossible to get anything through this mayor. Do you think that there may be a culture shift going on as far as um, do you think there's possibly less transparency going on now? I mean, obviously, we see the mayor is deleting text messages. I don't know if Mayor Garcetti would have done that.
Yeah.
And
So I'm going to be honest with you. My joke whenever I'm working in specifically city politics, because I do a lot of issues-based reporting and I do a lot of city reporting, but I don't do a lot of political reporting. My joke when I'm talking to a city politician is often, if I'm talking to a city politician, things have gotten pretty bad because that means that every other reporter is already working on it and somebody sent me to do it. I'm far more focused on public safety. I am moving a little bit more into city politics and the comings and goings these days. But speaking, we can go department by department if you like. Los Angeles Police Department has certainly gotten less responsive since 2021, 2022. Certainly. That wasn't any particular, employee leaving either. This was happening when Michael Moore was in charge. We were starting to see that slide. Then we saw Choi, who again, there was a bit of a slide, and now we are seeing, the new chief McDonald. Again, with this slide, I think part of LAPD, there is also, the Ben Camacho lawsuit and resulting fallout. I don't know how much your viewers know about that, but I will give you a very, very brief description of, there was a reporter, great reporter, his name is Ben Camacho, who made a public records request, and they didn't follow through with it. Camacho took them to court. They released, frankly, more than Ben had asked for, into a thumb drive, USB thumb drive. Ben published it. That did have, it was essentially just personnel photos of officers, and the city police union had a conniption about it, and the city then had a conniption about it. Ben was essentially told that he needed to return it. It was already public. And there are still, I believe, William, there's still some lawsuits going on from the union, correct? The union's still suing the city over that?
I don't know. No,
Okay.
actually, I think that's been.
It's been settled?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Don't quote me on that.
You'll have to
I
forgive
do.
me, everyone. I left LA very sillily for a few months, so.
Well,
But
no,
ultimately, so that case was when I noticed an immediate shift from LAPD being far too slow with responsive records to, I think I went about 6 months without getting a single record request fulfilled. And I know I'm not the only one that felt that way. And
I think there is a correlation between that happening. I think that time would have started somewhere around December 2022 when Karen Bass took office.
Fair.
I saw it immediately noticed the fact that CPRA's changed, and not just her. It's not just her taking office, but it was also the city attorney Heidi Feldstein Soto coming into office, who seemed hell bent when she came in to create less transparency throughout government, especially with the LAPD. And it's interesting you mentioned the fallout of the picture release scandal is because the police union, the LAPPL, filed a personnel complaint against Elizabeth Rhodes, the director of the Office of Constitution. Elizabeth Rhodes, the director of Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy, because she signed off on the picture release. And you're hearing this now. She has been relieved of her duty. She's been allowed to resign gracefully, but she was fired. She was fired, and I believe, in my opinion, speculating, and I think I'll have confirmation of the exact reason tomorrow, but it has a lot to do with the fact that the police union wanted her gone. They wanted to hold her accountable for the picture release. they have no control over. Listen, the city attorney who signed off on the release is no longer the city attorney, Mike Fuhrer. The only person they can go after was Elizabeth, and here we are. Uh, they got their pound of flesh. So yeah, no, I'm just bringing that up because that's the only fallout I've seen from
Yeah, I mean, I
after the
know.
picture
Look,
release.
I can't speak to whether she was fired or not. It would be speculation for me to say this. I will say this: the union was perhaps not publicly vocal about their dissatisfaction with Rhodes, but they were privately extremely loud about it.
Oh, listen, they filed a complaint against her, so they were pretty loud about it too.
Yeah. So basically, the larger point with public records, though, is LAPD is probably at this point, except for possibly the mayor's office, the least transparent, the hardest to get. So oftentimes pretty basic information from. I will say that the public information officers have varied wildly in their responsiveness based on, it seems, based on who in fact the chief is. And also who is in charge of the public information office. I think most reporters will agree. I'm not going to legislate it too much, but I will say that there has been an improvement since 2020. However, it's gone up and down since then.
I think right now, I think we're at a low point. I think first off, I couldn't tell you who the public information officer is because they don't release that name. You get this generic email. When I reached out to the last captain, they said they're no longer it, and they asked who is the new point of contact. They won't tell it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's I would say,
but
like,
I will say the captain is one thing. The people actually within the public information office, as far as I know, basically the same people. I don't necessarily want to call them out by name or anything like that because oftentimes they are quite helpful. But the actual officers that are handling the actual emails have stayed the same for the last few years for the most part.
I think that's changed under McDonald. He's come in and he's just changed everything up right now. Listen, because you're not when you get a response from the PIO, they're not even signing off their actual name, which is just outrageous. It means nobody's held accountable. McDonald won't respond to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of carried over. It's gotten to the point when it comes to the public requests of the LAPD for documents or records, they're going to deny you no matter what, unless they want you to have it for whatever reason, and you have to sue them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's come to.
So I will say I don't know a single reporter who works in the public safety sphere who doesn't have at least one record that they have sued to get or plan to sue to get. It can often be a pretty arduous process. However, the actual court case and things like that, usually pretty simple, frankly. There's lawyers that will do it for you. You're not going to make much money on it. The lawyer's going to make okay money on it, but it's really about transparency in government, making sure that, I've always said, I think people sometimes view reporters as this, like, I think sometimes reporters are guilty of making the language sound like, this big leak came out and, we, obtained a copy of, usually it's just they made a request for it or they asked someone to email it to them. It's almost always that. It's really important to understand that, reporters are not, reporters, lawyers, all these people, they're not using any tools that are not also available to you.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the key thing, right? And so that's why, listen, I find Next Request to be helpful using that portal. And like I said, a lot of the stuff that I find interesting on there has nothing to do with me making a request. It's searching through other people's requests in the past. And it's another reason why it's frustrating that there aren't other all the council members are not listed on there. I think it's something they need to talk about. Somebody should question them about it. Um, Speaking of which, so what do you think about the fact that, I want to get back to litigation because I think it's so important. What do you think about the fact that if you do want to actually get this documentation, you eventually have to sue? It's a little
Yeah.
frustrating, is it? Not just from in the public interest, but also if professionally as a reporter. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, frankly, it's very silly. And I can tell you most certainly that there have been more than a few court cases over the last few years where, the city's representation knows they're probably not going to win this case. And ultimately, I would say about 95% of the time, ultimately, it's just a quick settlement. Ish. Yeah, maybe 90. It's government bureaucracy. It's silly. It's not necessarily my job to say whether or not there should be an entire sort of small segment of the economy devoted entirely to attorneys for the city arguing with people who just want a copy of some email 5 years ago or some list of rakes that the Park Service had to buy 2 years ago. It seems silly that you would have to go to court to get that. I think everyone can agree that seems very silly, but ultimately, sometimes that's what it comes down to.
Do you feel that they're doing that? They sort of set up the process so that you have to go to court, just in hopes that you'll find the process to be cumbersome and arduous, and you'll just disappear and go away. Do you think it has anything to do with that, or do you think that they are truly believe that they have the right to withhold these documents under the law?
I can tell you most certainly that I've walked in, that I've seen court cases where literally you walk in and the city attorney has a settlement paper in their hand. So I think certainly in that particular case, the city does not believe that they have a right to withhold that document. I think it would be hard to argue otherwise. And there are other times where I think in the case of when you start getting into personnel files with pictures, things like that, I think the city oftentimes does genuinely think that they're going to win the case. And when they don't, ultimately it's just a waste of everyone's time.
Well, listen, I had a case.
That would be a good question. You know what? That would be a good question to get a former city attorney drunk and ask them in person. You know what I mean? Obviously, I can't interview a drunk person in my job, but
that's gonna be my new podcast, the Drunk Mike Fuhrer Hour, which would be actually be pretty cool. I'll be honest with you.
For what it's worth, I would watch that. I don't know how easy it would be to get him to agree to that, but I would watch it.
I think the only chance is if he decides that he is no longer going to run for office again. And with him, I don't think he's going to rule out another run for something, because it's just
he's ran for mayor. He's ran for mayor, I think.
He was city council.
And
he was
council and things like that.
City attorney.
It's what, 2008, 2012, something like that?
You know who would be a good one, though? Let's get a drunk Paul Koretz on the show one day.
Oh, man. Good luck.
That would be a lot of... Unless maybe a Buscaino.
What's that?
Buscaino would probably actually be pretty fun.
Yeah, probably.
A drunk Joe.
Listen, regardless of his politics, I will say he seems like a dude who would be fun to have a beer with.
Yeah, no, he definitely does. Otherwise, yeah, he's not exactly my cup of tea.
Whether you agree with his politics or not agree with his politics, he seems like a person who would be fun to have a beer with. I will say that.
Well, you mentioned earlier when we were talking, about the process of them settling quickly. The city attorney. I filed a lawsuit in November over post IDs with officers, and they settled just a few weeks ago. So we're talking about 3 months. It's a pretty quick settlement. They realized there wasn't a case there, and so my thing is, obviously, if I didn't sue, I wouldn't have gotten documents. seems like they're just ready to settle, and it's going to cost the taxpayers money. First off, taxpayers money for dedicating resources from the city attorney's office to fight this initially, or at least review it, and secondly, from whatever payout they're going to have to pay to the attorneys for handling the case on my end. They're going to be responsible for those attorney fees. And we pay a lot of money in liability settlements as it is in the city, and so it's frustrating that this process, it's not just about delaying people getting documents and having good governance, but also, listen, there's a financial aspect that it's costing us. But with that having been said, it's frustrating that if you're on my side, if you don't have the lawyers that are willing to do this, essentially pro bono, right? I can't just go to every case and say, here, lawyer, here's $20,000. Can you do this CPRA
I mean,
over?
you could do that.
I could, but
but you would run out of money.
Yeah, I'd run out of money very fast. I'd have to put together $1 million GoFundMe, and I don't think you're going to raise $1 million talking about like nuances of CPRA material. But it's frustrating.
I'm looking at the YouTube views, and there's 179 people watching right now. So if every single one of them donated $10,000, we could.
Well, I think we got 1,000 on Twitter for whatever reason. We got 1.1 thousand on Twitter. For whatever reason, the podcasts always do way better on Twitter than they do on YouTube. But that's fine with me, because I feel like the people that are paying attention to politics, mostly in LA, are on Twitter. And so, hopefully, and listen, let me also announce that in the coming days, I have somebody who agreed to come on this podcast to talk about governance, and that's my good friend Jamie York. What do you think about that?
Tell Jamie I said hello. I think that she's going to be a really interesting guest. I haven't talked to Jamie a whole lot in my career, but I will say she certainly is a good guest if you're talking about sort of the nuts and bolts of ethics within city governance, specifically Los Angeles.
Yeah, she knows.
If there's anyone who knows more off the top of their head.
I'm gonna tell you, I don't think anybody. I think she drove so much of the narrative around the fires related to Crowley. She was the one who was digging up before everybody else. She was the one who was digging up the documents and digging up interviews that Crowley had, where she laid out all the issues that the fire department was facing, that Karen Bass then denied. Not just her. What's his name? Andrew. I want to say, is it Ruddick or Riddick? He handles a lot of the stuff related to the Hollywood Walk of Fame stars. He dug up some stuff too, some videos. So I just think that Jamie is, when it comes to this sort of stuff, first off, for those of you that don't know, she was nominated to go onto the ethics commission. She was supposed to go on there, and then essentially, like, the unions and everybody went and sunk her. And listen, there's a special place in hell for all those council members who didn't stand up for her. In my book, I'll always come after him for that. But with that having been said, I think she does a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people don't know. A lot of research behind the scenes when it comes to city governance and nuts and bolts of things. And I think she's a heavily influential person in the city in ways that, again, people do not know about. So I look forward to having her as a guest to talk about just, who knows where it's going to go. Whether
I'll definitely be a viewer for that. When is that going to go on?
I haven't nailed it down with her, but I would imagine in the next couple of days.
Well, please text me before it comes on, because I want to watch
that. Yeah. I mean, she's educated me on Crowley so much. So.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about city government, and this is not just Los Angeles. I think anyone watching from anywhere can probably agree with this. Kind of, again, regardless of your political position. Most people had not heard of Crowley, even within the city of Los Angeles, until the fires happened. And those that were following public safety and things like that, I will say that when she was asking for additional funds for the fire department and saying, we needed more money, I am not going to legislate whether or not she was right. I'm not going to legislate whether or not she should have been fired. But I will say this. When she was asking for more money on a live mic while the fires were going, that was not new for her. She's been doing that since she got the job in, I think, 2017, no, a few years ago. That's not new. So for what it's worth.
It's funny, her speech that she made in front of the city council in her defense. I'll be honest with you, I feel like I've heard that same exact speech from her, and this is not a knock in any way. It's not making it. This is that she's been so consistent, where detailing all the issues that the fire department has had, detailing the fact that they're understaffed, detailing the fact that their call volume is up 55% while having 68 less officers as compared to 15 years ago, talking about the need for civilian employees, specifically mechanics, because they have a huge percentage of apparatus that's out of commission. So many apparatus out of commission that on the day of the fires, firefighters were showing up to the station and they did not have the trucks to transport them to the fire. She's been consistently talking about that. And, just to get a little political for a second, I think that the excuses that we heard from the mayor for firing her was, first off, that she sent firefighters home on the day of the fires. And it's just, again, that just my own research and literally quoting somebody who's allied with the mayor said that it just wasn't true. It had to do with the apparatus. She also mentioned, again, we talked about earlier about that after action report, where she said the mayor claimed that Crowley did not want to be a part of that process, but facts show that it hadn't even been funded yet. So you can't start an after action report that hasn't been funded. And what was the third issue? You remember? I forget. There was another one. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But what did you think about those hearings? Did you happen to catch Crowley's speech specifically
I did.
Before she entered the city council?
So I think there's a few things that I think a lot of people who maybe aren't constantly watching city politics of Los Angeles may not have noticed or known about those hearings. The first one, I think it is important to note that the union that represents the firefighters was very, very against her firing. They were very, very supportive of the appeal process. The last thing that Crowley did before she entered those city council chambers was did a press conference with the Los Angeles Firefighters Union behind her. So for what it's worth, right? The union was very pro Crowley.
I think that's important from a city council standpoint, because we have a couple of council members who are very connected to the unions, and that would be, say, Hugo Soto Martinez and also Tim McCosker, right?
I think it's fair to say that they're the most overtly pro-union city council people. I think, Los Angeles is it's a blue city. I think pretty much every council person will at least say they are pro-union. Whether or not they are, again, it's up to the union to tell you, and it's up to you to decide. But specifically, Hugo Soto Martinez, he comes from a union organizing background. He comes directly from Unite Here. And McCosker, is again, very, very, a lot of his speeches, especially when he was running and things like that, have been in support of unions. Soto Martinez's district, the hotel unions and things like that are a larger part of the workforce, whereas McCosker, you have the water right there. You have a lot of shipping, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that you have a lot of longshoremen union he's heavily connected with. Of course, didn't he work with the police union previously? So it's just interesting that the union felt very strongly about keeping her, but yet these council members decided to go with Karen Bass on that. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out going forward. Do you think there'll be political ramifications for this vote, or what do you think? Or do you think it's going to just kind of
I
drift
think
off?
it's too early to tell. I certainly think it's not my. I think that that's a question worth asking the fire unions. Um, I think it would be hard to say that it won't at least in some way affect their opinion of Hugo Soto Martinez and McCosker. I also think before we get too far, I think we've been saying fired. It's not entirely accurate for Crowley. She was actually just removed from the fire
Right,
chief
because
position.
she's technically a assistant chief still.
So yeah, so she's an assistant chief in the Valley now.
Yeah.
Is her job. So I would also argue that it's a little. If someone's incapable of being a fire chief, I don't know if assistant chief is a position that you'd want them in. I think that that's a little. It's funny how city politics work, isn't it?
Well, speaking of city politics, what do you think about Monica Rodriguez's reaction? She made a very an impassioned speech in defense of Crowley. And listen, I feel a certain way about it, having looked through literally like hours of video over the course of the last year of Crowley asking for more resources over and over again. And even when she asked for, like last year, she asked for 159 more firefighters. Now, they had an outside agency came in and said to meet international standards, you have to beef up your force by 400 people. She wanted to be very mindful from a fiscal aspect and only asked for one third. She asked for 159. And instead, she had 61 cut. So instead of increasing by 159, she had 61 in cut. And actually, Karen Bass had asked for 71 to be cut, but they reduced it to 61. And really, the main person who fought to get those cuts reduced was Monica Rodriguez. She's sort of been in this defending Crowley and defending Crowley's message over the last year. What did you think about her speech?
I think I will say this. There were two people that made speeches in defense of Crowley. There was Tracy Park, who represents, the far west side, your Venices, your Marvistas, etc. And you also saw Monica Rodriguez. Monica Rodriguez's speech, I think it really is important to know that Monica Rodriguez's district was the most affected by the fires. And I think that that's really important understanding how that vote went. Some of the
Tracy Park.
What's that?
Tracy Park's district?
Monica Rodriguez.
Oh, so her district was up in at the other fire too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Tracy Park was affected by the Palisades. Excuse me, you're right. Tracy Park represents the west side. Sorry about that. Look, I think Monica Rodriguez is, it's been interesting to see progressives agree with Monica Rodriguez, who is probably the most conservative member of Los Angeles City Council. I think that's fair to say. I think she would probably agree with me by saying that. That has been bizarre. I think it does bear mentioning a few things that I think are worth pursuing further. I think number one, I think Crowley's history, she was brought into the department largely as a response to sexual harassment and sexual assault scandals within the Los Angeles Fire Department. Two of the people that voted against her removal were women. I think it's also important to understand that Los Angeles City Council can make some work for some weird bedfellows occasionally, to say the least. And oftentimes, folks will. I think this is true of any politician. Folks will run on one thing, and then as soon as they're in the office, be a completely different person.
From an editorial standpoint, that's all of them. But
I will say this: Monica Rodriguez's speech to me felt very genuine.
Yeah.
And it did seem as though she genuinely felt like the right thing to do was to keep Crowley's position intact.
Yeah, I mean, listen, she's the person who's been paying most attention to the fire department issues, and when it comes to Tracy Park, um, it's her district where the fire was at in the Palisades, and she voted to reinstate Crowley. I think that says something, right? I mean, it's got to stand for something, especially when you're dealing with a city council that almost all too often votes together as a group, and rarely do you have those that disagree vote differently. To have even, usually it's like 15-0, but going 13-2 and having the council member whose district this fire affected, I think that says something. What do you think about that?
Sorry, say that again.
Having the fact that Tracy Park's district, where the fire was at in the Palisades, that she voted to reinstate Crowley. What do you think about that? Does you think that
I
has?
mean, look, again, it's not my job to say what the right or wrong decision is. I will say this. Tracy Park was likely in some of the most meetings with both Ms. Crowley and the mayor, and as such probably has the most amount of information. That's all I'll say.
Okay. All right, we've been on for an
and
hour
I'll take
and
a
a half.
sip of my drink.
I've been on for an hour and a half, getting ready to wrap it up. So tell me, what do you have coming up? What are your plans? Anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to add?
You're gonna see me. So I'm basically moving back to Los Angeles. Anyone who's following my career knows that I was in Chicago and Wisconsin for a little bit. So I'll be back here full time very soon. I'm very excited. If you see me around at a city council meeting or a police commission meeting or any sort of neighborhood council meeting, please say hello. I'm usually pretty nice. You're gonna see me, like I said, a freelancer, so I don't always control what I'm doing. But definitely take a peek at my social media. I'm always very good at telling people where I'm going to be at. If there's a big protest, you'll almost always see me there. That's kind of how I made my name. Probably see me with a cigarette and a Red Bull in my hand.
Or sometimes getting beaten up and stuff.
Well, hopefully not.
You've been through a few attacks. So you mentioned that you had moved to Chicago. I want to tell a little bit of your business real quick. And forgive me for this, but too bad. So Sean moved to Chicago back in December, and his going away party, I made a statement to him that kind of pissed him off a little bit. I said, I'll see you within the next year. And here we are.
You were right. It's funny how things work. I remember showing you Next Request like 4 years ago.
At a coffee shop.
At a coffee shop. Yeah, I don't even remember what the request was for.
It was for email communications related to one of the arrests that LA made against me, I believe. Or the people.
You know what that might have been? That might have been the Hollywood Entertainment District stuff.
Oh, we did that day too, which was super interesting.
Which turned out to be really good for me. Yeah. It ended up giving me a story and showed that, the numbers were pretty wonky, to say the least.
So the fact that, like I said, it was December where you said you were moving. Safe to say that the Midwest winter isn't quite like
it absolutely destroyed me. And I'm from the Midwest too. But I learned that I've been in LA for a while. I turned into a wimp with the cold. And I also, it occurred to me, I lived in Los Angeles for about 12 years. It had become my home. And sometimes you need to go away from your home for a little while to appreciate your home. And Los Angeles might perhaps be not the healthiest place in the world. It might not perhaps be the most giving place in the world, but I love it. Yeah, so it's kind of like my family.
Yeah, 80 degrees in February. I'm sorry, you just can't beat that. People go on vacation, you get 80 degrees in February. When you came back a few weeks ago, I think you stepped off the plane and it was like 80.
Yeah.
There's a premium to pay to that you have to pay for that, and I'm perfectly fine paying for it. I wish it was cheaper, but it is what it is. It's a good
Yep.
lifestyle. All right, man. I appreciate you coming on here. Make sure you come back again. I have a feeling you'll come back again, and yeah, we'll take it from there. All right, everybody, enjoy yourself. Shout out to the mods, and I'll be back tomorrow talking about LAPD union stuff. We have an update in that, but we'll get into that tomorrow. All right, guys, take care.